Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at theDove.us. Welcome back. Delighted to have our next guest with us. Been really anxious to talk about this particular topic, and we have with us today Dr. William Gairdner. He's a pretty busy guy. Of course, he loves athletics. He is an academic. He's a businessman. He writes a lot of books. He leaps tall buildings, outruns locomotives. But his latest book is the one I want to get into. It's called The Great Divide: Why Liberals and Conservatives Will Never, Ever Agree. And I think we all would agree that we are polarized in this country. And can we ever get along? I don't know. William, good to see you. How are you, my friend?
Thank you for having me. I'm just fine.
Nice. What prompted you to take this on?
Well, people often ask me, it's Perry, right?
Yes.
People often ask me why I write my books, and I say, well, it's almost like the books write me. You know, you sort of get pregnant with an idea and an inspiration, and you have to have the baby.
Well, I think a lot of people would agree that we're polarized in this country and we may never get together again. Are you seeing that? Well,
everybody's talking about the Great Divide in the USA at the surface. The reason I wrote this book, and I know the title sounds negative, but it's more provocative than negative. It's really an attempt on my part to get people to leave the surface emotions and arguments behind and start dealing with the real underlying ideological clashes. The image I use is of a man standing on the road on a beautiful afternoon, and suddenly there's a huge crack in the road, and he sees the buildings tumbling around him, and he says, "Oh my gosh, it's an earthquake." But of course, that's not the earthquake. It's the consequences of the earthquake. The real earthquake is the clash of geological forces below the ground that he can't see. Well, my book is about the clash of ideological forces that we can't see. What we're seeing is mostly the political and moral rubble at the surface. And instead of dealing with the real causes, which are invisible, as I say, and revealed, I hope, in this book, instead of dealing with those, we go to emotion. That's the go-to debate tactic these days is emotion, words like outrage. And my book is trying to reverse that, do whatever job I can to help reverse that and get the whole population back to having more dignified and statesman-like discussion.
Let me just stay there just for a moment. Do you think the debate has become too cynical? Now, I do a lot of talk radio and television, and I have become conscientious of the fact that it's just so cynical. Why listen?
Well, we're kind of saying the same thing, I guess, what you're saying and what my book is saying. You know, I often give public speeches, and inevitably someone will stand up and say, "Mr. Gairdner, I'm outraged by what you've been saying." And I look them right in the eye, and I say, "Well, you couldn't be more outraged than I am. Now, what's your point?" And it's like watching air come. It's like watching air come out of a balloon. If they have any brains, which most of them do, they say, "Ah, I see. You can't deal with my emotions. You want a statement of fact or a firm opinion so that you can debate me in a dignified way." And I say, "Yeah, that's all I'm asking. I mean, I could be wrong. You could be right, but we can't know that if all you're doing is shouting and yelling at each other, you know?"
Okay, I'll come back to that because I think you really hit a nerve, especially with me on that particular one. But you have identified 8 core topics that seem to be the Great Divide. You want to run us through those?
I will. There's the first part of the book is those core topics. They are the deeply ideological topics. For example, I say that liberals and conservatives at a fundamental level have a different conception of human nature. I'll just give you a quick example. That's number one. For example, most liberals conceive of themselves as progressives. They believe that human nature is malleable, and therefore human nature can be changed. It can be altered by public policy, taxation policies, and laws. And through that process that we can arrive at I suppose you'd call it the kingdom of heaven on earth. That's what they're aiming for. The true conservative says nonsense. Human nature is not that malleable. It's fundamentally fixed, universal, fairly constant, and that human beings are pretty much fallible, prone to evil if they're not surrounded by what Aristotle called their second nature, which is all the good things and customs and good manners they learn from parents and society. And so, these two concepts of human nature simply cannot be reconciled. That's why I say we'll never, ever agree on that. But what I'm arguing is let's at least talk about that and not about some policy struggle at the surface, which is here today and gone tomorrow. Issue in the book is the concept of reason. Liberals and conservatives differ on their whole notion of the definition and the use of human reason as well. Same with democracy, same with the notion of freedom. Same, and this is a big one, same with the notion of equality and inequality. That's a big one today. Everyone's talking about the 1% and all the rest of it more than they were in the past. And then morality and the self, the concept of God and religion, all these are dealt with in the first part of the book. And then in the last part, I have the three main issues, the social and the moral issues, where you see all these underlying tensions come together: abortion, euthanasia, and homosexuality and gay rights and all that. I think what your listeners would like to know is that at the end of every chapter, there's a little chart or a table in which they can find out where they stand. Am I more liberal? Am I more conservative? And a lot of people who read these charts, they come back to me or they call me and they say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I'm talking one story and I'm walking another. Wow. So the book's about self-discovery. Yeah, the book's about self-discovery too.
That's fascinating. Do you sense that the two-party system has worsened this problem? Because what I'm sensing now is that people on the right may have some belief systems that would fit in the left, but it doesn't allow them to express that, and vice versa.
Well, that's correct. What I call politics or party politics. In this book, again, I stress it's not about party politics. It's about political and moral philosophy. For example, in Canada as well as in the U.S., you'll often hear of a conservative party which actually comes down with an extremely liberal or progressive type of law. And again, you'll see, say, the Democratic Party in your country sometimes will come up with a very conservative sort of law. So, that's all party politics and playing for power, for power and vote getting. And I don't want to be overly cruel or use language I shouldn't use on your program, but I think of party politics, I call it prostitution politics. There's four corners on the street, and the politician comes up looking for a wife on the other three corners, and there's he goes around and asks each one of them, what they're going to give him for his money, and each talk to him like, okay, here's how much money I want. I'm going to be your mistress for the night or whatever. But he says, the politician who says, no, I don't want a mistress, I want a wife, a spouse. That's a very different question, and he's going to meet a very different kind of woman, And what I call prostitution politics is this process we've all had way too much of, where politicians will say almost nothing when they talk, and when they do talk, that what they're doing is they're shaping their speech to get votes. Well, someone once said that the difference between a politician and a statesman is as follows: the politician's interested in the next election. In the next election, the statesman is interested in the next generation. My book is calling out to the people, first of all, to read it, secondly, to find out where they stand in each of these 14 issues, and then put out a call for more statesman-like behavior from those who represent us.
Very well said. Wow, this is big. How do you think, well, with the Great Divide, what happened to common sense? It just seems to have fallen through the cracks. I mean, everybody wants to claim it, but what happened to it?
Well, I do talk about that in the book too, but what we call common sense is a very useful term, is if in fact you have something in common. And I think what's happened over the last 50 or 60 years, and I talk about this a lot in the book, there's been a big change in the way we conceive of ordinary human life. For example, back then, we were more concerned about self-discipline and self-reliance, and then somehow there came about this change to the idea of, okay, it's not my fault, it's the fault of the system that I'm poor or I'm lazy or I'm behaving in stupid ways. In other words, we switched to self-gratification and self-expression as our main themes. And, back then we were interested in liberty under law, much less interested in what we call equality today, or forced equality, where this government gets involved in trying to change human nature and human life through policy. Back then we were interested in getting people to the starting line at the same time. Now we have countries, almost all the democracies have made this change, where they're trying to get people to the finish line together. And they're doing it through forced equality. Well, that gets the modern democracies. America's no different here from Canada or any other democracy. It gets them into a contradiction. How can you have maximum individual liberty, so to speak, under law, and also have maximum forced equality? You can't do it. So the way that these democracies resolved that contradiction was they split the body politic in two. We now have two parts of the body politic. We have the public part, which is kind of socialist. It's a very sloppy kind of socialism, but it's there big time. What people call statism these days, and over-regulation, over-taxation, and so on. And then the second part of the body is the physical part, our bodily and sexual freedoms. Well, everywhere we look, we see more democracy, but less freedom, with one exception. We have far more bodily and sexual freedoms than we ever had in all of human history. I can't think of any nation in the history of the world that ever had more of these things. Look at it. Pornography everywhere, gay rights, gay marriage, abortion rights, transgender rights. I mean, you name it. It's there. And I suspect, and I outline in my book, that this has been a kind of Faustian deal. The people have accepted the loss of their typical and traditional political and economic freedoms in exchange for more bodily and sexual freedoms. And that's how the modern democracies resolve their own contradiction.
Whoa. Are we meeting or heading towards some kind of a saturation point? I mean, some books will call it the fourth turning, the third turning. I don't know if you've looked into any of that, but in generational science, this thing could hit a wall and start over again.
Well, I think it could. There's four unexpected truths that really came out of my study. And one of them I just outlined to you, which is this idea that we have more government and also more sexual freedom at the same time. I describe this fourth stage of modern democracy as libertarian socialism. That's what it is. We're living as both. We live publicly as socialists, and we live privately as sexual libertarians, if we want to. It's all there. But so that's the first big change. And that was a kind of entrapment, a kind of deal that we walked into half blind. The second big change is that because we have made a switch from democracies with a foundation based in liberty to democracies that have a foundation rooted in forced equality, I think we have put our civil societies under attack. Now, civil society is the zone of modern democracy, which has always been typified by voluntary associations, the family, churches, soccer clubs, charitable groups. I mean, millions of these kinds of freely created human organizations from which we always have gotten our social bonding. But when you have an egalitarian state at the top and individual rights emphasis at the bottom, civil society comes under attack. Egalitarian democracy is trying to get rid of all the privileges that come out of things like your family, your company, your church, and your soccer team. You have those rights and privileges in those groups, but I don't. And you don't have those privileges in my groups, you see. Well, egalitarian states can't stand the creation of that kind of private privilege. So they set about trying to destroy it, not by eliminating it, but by giving it to everybody without qualification. And they do that through welfare state handouts and public policies like that. So what are some of the effects of that? The third big deal, I think, is what I call moral rupture. All the modern democracies, with very few exceptions, have got themselves into big-time structural permanent debt. This is debt that they cannot pay off, and they can't raise taxes anymore, or they're going to have revolt. So what do? They start borrowing from unborn generations who aren't here to defend themselves against our own extravagant appetites. Well, this is taxation without representation. The unborn cannot defend themselves, so we're ripping them off. And not only that, because we're asking them to pay for stuff that we're consuming when they get here and when they start working, 20 years down the road. So I think that has caused an intergenerational moral rupture, and it's teaching the young to rip off the next generation too. They're seeing it as normal. Lastly, I would say I think all the democracies are becoming, or some have become, what I call tripartite states. Now, a tripartite state is one in which 1/3 of the people are producing the wealth and the jobs, 1/3 are employed by government at some level, and you have to include all full-time contracts with government in that. And lastly, the last section is the 1/3 who are receiving significant benefits from the state. Well, anybody can see the last two segments are always going to gang up on the first in the voting booth. It's like two wolves and a sheep deciding on what to have for dinner.
Fascinating. Let me take a quick break. We'll be right back. The book is entitled The Great Divide, and let me encourage you to check it out. There's a picture of it there on the screen. And where can they get the books, William?
It's pretty well stocked in all your Barnes & Noble stores, Books A Million, and of course Amazon, which you can go to as well.
We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and what a fascinating time with our guest today, William Gairdner. He's the author of a book called The Great Divide: Why Liberals and Conservatives Will Never, Ever Agree. And I think what he has done in his work here is really opened our brain to a lot of things that needed to be talked about and put on the table. And I can't wait to finish getting into the book. And William, again, thank you for your work. This is terrific because it hits on so many cylinders for me. A couple of remaining questions before I run out of time. One is talking about somewhat the moral rupture. Is liberalism a product of social evolution? I mean, where was liberalism? Where is it originally? Where did it come from? How did we go from honoring life to killing it? I mean, what happened?
Well, I should. This is the Christian station, so I should warn your readers. They better be sitting down when they read my chapter on, well, the last 3 chapters. One reviewer, can't remember who it was, he said they were ferocious. Well, they're ferocious because the book really takes aim at these issues in the deepest sense. And as I said, you better be sitting down because some of it's pretty hard-hitting stuff. But the arguments, I think, are very solid, and I try to give both sides. I show the readers the liberal arguing in defense of abortion and gay rights and euthanasia, and I show the conservative side arguing against them. And then, like I said, the reader is thoroughly versed in the arguments by the time they get to the quiz at the end of each chapter, and then they can review their own position. I should mention also, Perry, if you don't mind the flagrant self-promotion, I have a website. It's just my name, williamgairdner.com. And your listeners and viewers, rather, can go to my website and buy the book right from that website if they want, and they can also look at other material related to these topics.
That's William Gairdner, GAIRDNER.com. I want to come back to the rhetoric, so to speak. Now, I'm on the right. I'm a conservative. But I have become very concerned, William, about the tone, the disrespect, the anger, and the cynicism of our argument. I think we're losing on those bases.
Well, I think so too. And if I may be so bold, and again, if you don't mind the immodesty, I think this book is going to help with that issue because it tries to take the debates to a new plane, to a higher plane. Well, I should say it's not new. When I was a young man, you know, if an older gentleman, well, if my father or any of his friends asked me what I thought about some of these issues when I was, say, 20 years old, they would have expected a firm opinion, and they would have expected me to defend it in reasonably eloquent terms without a lot of muttering and stuttering and fishing around for words. What they would not have taken for a moment, they would have laughed me out of the room, would be if I had said what so many people say today, well, it's true for you, but it's not true for me. You know? I mean, that's one of the things that drove me to write this book. When someone said that to me, that's how I got started in the book, I would turn to them and I would say, well, it can't be true and false at the same time. One of us must be wrong. And this was an invitation to have a high debate on the issue. But instead, you know, they just go across the room and drink with someone else. So I thought something's wrong here. This society's falling apart.
All right. So is this a moral thing? Is it moral failure to have this divide?
I think, well, you'll see the morality part, besides the fact that I have a chapter on the different conceptions, liberal and conservative conceptions of morality, which is quite an interesting chapter. It does run all through the book. I mean, I would say that morality sits on top of religion and politics sits on top of morality. If I'm right about that, then changes in the moral substructure of society are going to affect the changes in the political structure of society, which is like a superstructure sitting on top of it. Same with philosophies, Every philosophy has an underlying moral basis, which you can ferret out if you know how to do that. So yeah, morality is all through this book, and the changes in morality and in our self-conception. These are very serious matters. The book is not an academic book in the sense that it's not written for specialists. It's written for, the non-specialist, intelligent reader who has an interest in the topic. And I can't wait for it to take off, because I think it's very much needed in the discussion down there in the USA. And frankly, everywhere we live under what we call democracy. You asking earlier, by the way, about what happened to liberalism. Well, the book does a very brief 4-stage analysis. I talk about liberalism as having come to North America in 4 stages. The first one was what I call virtue liberalism. That was all the Christians and Puritans who came to the North American continent, both to Canada and to the USA, trying to escape the oppressions and the religious wars in Europe and the hierarchies and all that sort of thing. So they wanted to create a new kind of kingdom of, New Jerusalem here in America. And but that soon mutated as secularism raised its head, and we got into the sort of what I call the property and contract stage of liberalism, individual freedom stage under the philosophy of John Locke. And America really changed direction when that happened. And your Declaration of Independence, I mean, John Locke could have written that instead of Jefferson. Jefferson basically lifted most of those terms from the philosophy of John Locke. That served everybody well for about 150 years, and then what happened was all the leaders in America started to say, well, freedom is fine, but the fact that poor people and rich people are both free to sleep under a bridge is not really solving our problem, which is justice and equality. So we've got to start shifting everything. And so what I call property and contract liberalism, individual liberalism, switched over slowly to what you might call equality liberalism. And that's what got everybody into what I call the modern contradiction. How could you have maximum freedom as your basis and maximum forced equality as your basis? You could only do it splitting the body politic, and that's why we have what I now call libertarian socialism, where we've managed to bridge the gap, so to speak, by splitting it. We basically worship both these idols. The most common question we hear today is, "What's the government going to do about it?" That's something you never would have heard in the past. People would have spat on that idea.
No question about it. We're going to run out of time. Let me just plug it one more time. The Great Divide. Check it out at the bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. And you can go to William's website. That's William Gairdner, GAIRDNER.com. And you can order it there and familiarize yourself with all of his other writings. William, one other quick question. I only got about a minute, so I apologize for that. It appears that this great divide that you've talked about in our society and our culture, quite frankly, has showed up in the American church. We're seeing the American church now divide over this.
Oh, it's been going on for a long time. When people ask me what religion I am, I say I'm a disappointed Anglican. The liberalism of the church in our time, at least up here in Canada, I know you have a lot of it down there too, it's just been quite surprising to see, quite shocking. And like, good heavens, in our politics in Canada here, we have some Roman Catholic politicians who are supporting abortion and things like that. And someone walks up and says, "Hey, you're a Roman Catholic. How can you support abortion?" "Well, I'm a Democrat first." That kind of thing. Well, I wouldn't vote for that. I wouldn't vote for that guy.
I got to go. Thank you, William, for your time. Love to have you back, and we will do that. Thanks for your work, and thanks for doing this. I can't wait to finish reading it, and we'll have you back, okay? All right, nice to see you. All right.
Love to be with you.
All right, thank you. The Great Divide, check it out at the bookstores, and or you can go to his website. That's William D. Gairdner, GAIRDNER.com, and you can check it out there. We'll see you next time on Focus.